again to TM Forum's Management World Africa Conference and our outside studio today. I've got with me two guests from PricewaterhouseCoopers. Firstly, Ahmed Chohan, who's a partner in advisory services, and Adrian Dunsby, Associate Director of Advisory. They've both been presenting earlier today, and I asked them to come along to answer some very relevant questions about the Africa market. Firstly, Adrian, what do you think are the most significant challenges facing African operators today?
Tony, at the moment, the key challenges relate to expansion into the continent. So from a Southern Africa point of view, we've got some very strong international players. Secondly, deployment of advanced services, where we have a different dynamic. We have a lot of we have services where we need to get out to the populations, but we have segments of the countries, of populations that are looking for much more advanced services. And then I think thirdly, managing the regulatory interactions, which is an issue. In Southern Africa, we see mobile termination rates being subject to regulatory interventions, a lot of pressure on costing, and obviously on broadband infrastructure.
And what do you see as the keys to success for operators in the Africa market today?
Dealing with some of the geographical issues that we have. It's a huge continent. To be able to get coverage, wide coverage, we might even have to start looking at things like passive infrastructure sharing. From an economic perspective, we'll probably need to start looking at how to keep profitable services at low average revenue per user, probably below $10, $9 level. They're the key success factors that the operators have to deal with going forward.
And Ahmed, something close to your heart. How are African operators addressing the challenges of revenue assurance? And are they even worrying about revenue assurance this early in the customer acquisition stage?
I think we're finding quite a number of operators that are actually trying to get some type of revenue assurance, revenue management function running. What we're finding is that there's a considerable shortage of skills in the African continent, and particularly in some of the West African countries, Central Africa as well, a real shortage of skills, and that's really hampering progress in the revenue assurance space. I think there is a bit of a growing hunger for revenue assurance in our industry, but I think the skill shortage is something that we need to overcome right now.
Ahmed, on revenue assurance again, I'd like to know on a maturity scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the least mature, where you would place revenue assurance in African operators just now.
Africa is a big continent with quite a number of countries, and it's difficult to paint the whole of Africa with one paintbrush. So I would say most African operators, from a revenue assurance perspective, are largely immature in relation to some of the European operators and some of the first world countries. I would rate most of them in the region of 2 to 5, but there's still a long way to go for African operators in the revenue assurance space.
This is an early foray into the African market for the TM Forum, and Adrian, I'd like to know whether you think African operators can learn something from the TM Forum's activities, their members, and even members' experiences globally. Do you think it'll be valid for this market?
I think there's a very clear benefit for African operators as a whole to see the global best practices that are encapsulated in things like ETOM and the systems variants like OSSJ. And I would like to think that there's a little bit that perhaps the African operators could give back, because we do manage to have very profitable businesses at relatively low ARPU, 35-40% EBITDA margin. So we might have a little bit to give back as well, which would be great.
Adrian, we heard earlier today in one of the panel discussions about the productivity of African operators and that it was very high. Could you explain what is meant by high productivity in a mobile operator particularly?
Certainly, Tony. What we're normally looking at is a measure of the number of customers per employee. In Southern African operators, we're generally operating at about 4,000 or 5,000 customers per employee. But there's a lot of dynamics behind some of those numbers that we need to be careful of, which includes the use of third parties and outsourced provisions and contractors. That can change some of the numbers a little bit. But overall, we are quite efficient as operators down here.
Thank you both for being with me, Adrian and Ahmed from PricewaterhouseCoopers. Please enjoy the rest of the day and enjoy some of this fantastic South African weather. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.